The world swam into focus like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Colors blurred and bled into one another, gold, rose, and cream, before sharpening into impossible clarity. The ceiling above me was not the water-stained plaster of my cramped studio apartment, but an expanse of ivory carved with celestial patterns that seemed to shift in the morning light. I blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. The silk beneath my fingers was real, impossibly soft, impossibly smooth, impossibly expensive. I had never touched anything like it in my life. My thrift store sheets were a distant memory, their familiar rough texture replaced by this decadent whisper of fabric. "Aurora? Are you awake, princess?" The voice came from somewhere to my right, melodic and concerned. I turned my head slowly, half expecting to see my neighbor Mrs. Chin checking on me after I'd fainted from low blood sugar again. Instead, I found myself staring at a young woman in a simple gray dress with a white apron, her brown hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hands clasped before her in a gesture that was part deference, part worry. "Princess." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Your Highness, you gave us quite a scare." The woman, a maid, my brain supplied, she's dressed as a maid, moved closer, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "You collapsed in the garden yesterday. The physician said it was merely exhaustion, but we've all been so worried." I stared at her, my mind spinning like a hamster wheel that had suddenly been kicked into overdrive. Princess. Garden. Physician. These words didn't fit together. They belonged in the pages of books, in the scrolling text of fanfiction, in the vivid daydreams I'd been having since I was old enough to understand what a princess was. They did not belong in my reality. "Where am I?" I managed, my voice cracked and dry. The maid's brow furrowed with concern. "Your chambers, Your Highness. In the Rose Tower. Do you not recognize it?" I looked around the room properly for the first time. It was massive, larger than my entire apartment, probably larger than my apartment building's entire floor. The bed I lay in could have comfortably slept 6 people, its canopy of pale pink silk cascading down from a gilded frame. The walls were paneled in pale wood, decorated with tapestries depicting scenes of courtly love and lush gardens. A vanity stood against one wall, its mirror framed in gold and silver, surrounded by crystal bottles and velvet boxes. French doors led out to a balcony, where I could see the barest hint of a blue sky and the tops of trees. This was not my room. This was not my life. This was the room I'd described in my novel. The thought struck me like lightning and I gasped. The maid rushed forward, reaching for my hand. "Your Highness? Should I call for the physician?" No, I'm fine." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. "I need a moment. Please." "Of course, princess." The maid bobbed a curtsy and retreated to a corner of the room, where she busied herself with arranging flowers that I hadn't noticed before. Pink roses. My favorites. The same roses I described in excruciating detail in Chapter 3. Chapter 3. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. This had to be a dream. A particularly vivid fever dream brought on by that questionable gas station sushi I'd had for dinner. Any moment now, I'd open my eyes and find myself back in my studio, my laptop still open to the last chapter I'd been editing, my cat Mr. Whiskers demanding breakfast with his usual impatient meow. But when I opened my eyes, the Rose Tower was still there. The maid was still there. And I was still lying in a bed that cost more than everything I'd ever owned combined. A choked sound escaped my throat. It might have been a laugh. It might have been a sob. I wasn't sure anymore. "Your Highness." The maid was at my side again, her face pale with worry. "Shall I fetch Princess Cordelia?" She's been beside herself with worry since yesterday. Princess Cordelia. The name hit me like a physical blow. Cordelia was my novel's secondary protagonist, the older sister, the supportive sibling, the one who held everything together when the kingdom fell apart. I'd poured so much of myself into her character that she'd practically become a sister to me too. In the lonely hours of the night, writing by the dim glow of my laptop screen, she'd been my confidant, my comfort, the friend I'd never had. And now she was real. Or I was in her world.
Or,
Please, I said, the word coming out stronger than I felt. Please bring her. The maid curtsied and hurried out, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I was alone in this impossible room, surrounded by the physical manifestation of every fantasy I'd ever had. I forced myself to sit up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My body felt different, lighter, healthier, stronger. No chronic back pain from hunching over my laptop. No tension headache from staring at screens. My hands, when I held them up to my face, were soft and unblemished, the nails perfectly shaped and buffed to a gentle shine. I scrambled out of bed and ran to the vanity, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The face that stared back at me from the gilded mirror was mine, but not mine. The same bone structure, the same hazel eyes, the same slightly crooked smile. But this version of me there was no other word for it. Beautiful star. My skin was clear and luminous. My hair cascaded down my back in waves of honey gold, and there was a light in my eyes that I'd never seen in my own reflection. I reached up to touch my face, and the reflection did the same. The movement was seamless, perfect. This was me. This was really me. And I knew exactly who I was. Princess Aurora of Valdres, the protagonist of my novel. The character I'd poured my heart and soul into for 3 years, the one who'd lived and breathed in my imagination until she felt more real than my own life.
she was me now.
I was her. The door opened behind me, and I spun around to see a woman standing in the doorway, her hand still on the handle. She was tall and elegant, with dark hair swept up in an elaborate arrangement, and eyes the color of warm amber. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, and her expression was one of such profound relief and love that it made my chest ache. Aurora. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped me in her arms. Thank the gods. I was so worried. I stood frozen in her embrace, my mind racing. This was Cordelia. My Cordelia. The sister I'd written to be kind, fierce, and endlessly protective. The character who'd become my favorite part of the entire story. And she was holding me like I was the most precious thing in the world. Aurora? She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, searching my face with those warm amber eyes. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, I managed, my voice still shaky. I had a strange dream. It felt so real. I dreamed I was someone else. Someone who wasn't. I stopped, realizing how insane I sounded. But Cordelia just nodded, her expression softening. The physician said you might experience confusion after the collapse. It's the body's way of protecting itself. You've been working yourself too hard, dear sister. We've all been telling you to rest, but you never listen. I almost laughed. Working too hard. My characters in the novel had been working too hard. The kingdom was in crisis, the neighboring country was threatening war, and Princess Aurora was running herself ragged trying to hold everything together. I'd written her that way because I knew what it felt like to push yourself past the breaking point. And now I was living it. I'll rest, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. I promise. But first, I hesitated, not knowing what to say next. What did you say when you woke up in a world you'd created? When the people you'd imagined became real before your eyes? First, Cordelia said firmly, taking my hand and leading me to a plush chaise lounge by the window. You're going to sit down, and I'm going to have the kitchen send up some breakfast. You haven't eaten properly in days. I can tell. I let myself be guided to the lounge, sinking into its soft cushions. This was surreal. This was impossible. And yet here I was, in a body that was mine but better, in a world that existed only in the pages of my unfinished manuscript. Unfinished. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I'd written about 30,000 words of my novel before I'd what? Before I'd gone to sleep in my studio apartment and woken up here. The story was only halfway done. The plot was still developing. Major conflicts had been introduced but not resolved. And now I was living it. Aurora? Cordelia's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. You're doing it again. That thing where you stare into space like you're trying to solve all the world's problems. I was just thinking, I said, forcing a smile. About the kingdom. I searched my memory, trying to recall where exactly I'd left off in the plot. About the summit with Eldoria. Is that still happening? Cordelia's expression shifted, a shadow passing over her beautiful face. It's still scheduled for next month. But, Aurora, you know Father has been. I know. I cut her off, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me. Somewhere that knew this world and its politics intimately. He wants me to consider a diplomatic marriage, to help secure the alliance. The words tasted strange in my mouth, even though I was the one who'd written them. In the novel, Princess Aurora had been torn between her duty to the kingdom and her desire to choose her own path in life. It had been the central conflict of her character arc, the thing that drove her to push herself so hard. And now it was my conflict, my burden. Uncle Marcus has been whispering in his ear again, Cordelia said, her voice tight with barely suppressed anger. You know how he feels about women in positions of power. He'd marry you off to the first noble who came calling if he thought it would strengthen his own position. I nodded, remembering. Uncle Marcus. The villain's right-hand man, the scheming advisor who'd been undermining the royal family for years. I'd written him to be the kind of character you love to hate, the kind who made your blood boil with every smooth lie and calculated manipulation. I won't let him, I said, the words coming out with more force than I intended. I won't be sold off like cattle. I don't care what Father thinks or what the kingdom needs. Cordelia stared at me, her eyes wide. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. There you are. I was worried the collapse had taken the fight out of you. It's going to take more than a little fainting to stop me, I said, and I almost believed it. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Crown. The days that followed were a blur of adjustment and discovery. I learned to navigate the Rose Tower's winding corridors, to accept the gentle ministrations of the servants who seemed to appear whenever I needed something, to sit through endless meals in the grand dining hall with the royal family. My family. That was the strangest part of all. King Aldrich, my father in this world, was a stern man with kind eyes and a heavy burden. I'd written him to be a good king who'd been worn down by years of political maneuvering, a man who loved his daughters but struggled to show it. Watching him across the dinner table, I could see every line of worry etched into his face, every gray hair that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. Queen Eleanor, my mother, was everything I'd imagined and more. She was graceful and poised, with a warmth that filled every room she entered. In my novel, she'd been the emotional heart of the family, the one who kept everyone together when everything else fell apart. Seeing her now, I understood why. And then there was Cordelia, my sister in this world, my friend in the one I'd left behind. She was everything I'd written her to be, fierce, loyal, and utterly devoted to her family. In the quiet moments between responsibilities, she would corner me in my chambers and ply me with tea and gossip, her amber eyes sparkling with mischief. You're different, she said one afternoon, about a week after my awakening. We were in my sitting room, a cozy space filled with books and flowers and the soft afternoon light that streamed through the window. Since the collapse, you seem, I don't know, more aware? Like you're really seeing everything for the first time. I looked up from the embroidery I'd been attempting, badly, and met her gaze. Maybe I am. Maybe I just realized how much I was taking for granted. Cordelia tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made me squirm. What happened in that garden, Aurora? When you collapsed? Did you see something? Hear something? I hesitated. The truth was too impossible to speak aloud. How could I explain that I'd woken up in a world I'd created? That the sister sitting across from me was a character I'd invented during lonely nights of writing? That every face I saw, every conversation I had, was part of a story I'd been telling myself for years? I just felt overwhelmed, I said finally. Like everything was too much. And then everything went dark, and when I woke up, I was here. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Cordelia seemed to accept this, though I could see the questions still lingering in her eyes. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Well, I'm glad you're all right. And I'm glad you're finally letting yourself rest. You've been running yourself ragged for months, Aurora. It was only a matter of time before your body gave out. I nodded, grateful for the easy explanation. The truth was, I was still struggling to make sense of everything. The memories of my other life were fading, growing dimmer and more distant with each passing day. I could still remember my studio apartment, still remember the feel of my laptop keyboard under my fingers, still remember the taste of instant ramen and the warmth of Mr. Whiskers curled up on my chest. But those memories felt like someone else's now, like a dream I'd once had, fading with the morning light. The hours between meals and duties were spent exploring my new life. I walked the castle grounds, marveling at the gardens I'd only ever described in words. I visited the library, running my fingers along the spines of books that existed only in my imagination. I watched the sun set over the mountains from my balcony, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that no screen could ever capture. I also spent a lot of time in front of the mirror. It was vain, I knew, but I couldn't help it. Every time I caught my reflection, I was struck anew by how different I looked. This version of me was everything I'd ever wanted to be. Beautiful, elegant, healthy. The dark circles under my eyes were gone. The hollows in my cheeks had filled out. My hair, which had been thin and lifeless in my other life, now fell in thick waves of honey gold. I was the princess I'd always dreamed of being. And yet I still felt like an imposter. Like any moment, someone would realize I didn't belong here and cast me out. The first real test came at the end of my second week. A diplomatic dinner, Cordelia announced, sweeping into my chambers with a gown draped over her arm. The Eldorian ambassador is visiting, and Father wants us to make a good impression. I groaned, sinking deeper into the cushions of my lounge. Do I have to? Can't I just plead illness? You've been pleading illness for 2 weeks, Cordelia said, unimpressed. People are starting to talk. And anyway, you look perfectly healthy. The colors return to your cheeks, and you're eating properly again. There's no excuse. I sighed, sitting up. She was right, of course. I'd been avoiding social obligations as much as possible, afraid of saying the wrong thing or betraying my ignorance of this world's customs. But I couldn't hide forever. Fine, I said, resigning myself to my fate. What's the occasion? Cordelia laid the gown across the back of a chair and began explaining. The Eldorian ambassador, Lord Theron, had arrived with a proposal for increased trade between our two kingdoms. It was a delicate negotiation. Eldoria was a powerful neighbor, and King Aldrich was eager to secure their goodwill. Father wants you to be especially charming, Cordelia said, her eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement. Apparently, Lord Theron has a son. A very handsome son. And he's coming to the dinner too. I stared at her. You're joking. I never joke about eligible bachelors. She gave me a look that was half wicked, half wistful. His name is Prince Kale. He's the heir to the Eldorian throne, and he's unmarried. Father hasn't said it outright, but I think.
No.
The word came out sharp, cutting through the afternoon quiet. I'm not going to be paraded around like a prize mare. Not even for the Eldorian heir. Cordelia's expression softened. I know, Aurora. But you have to understand, Father is desperate. The kingdom is in a precarious position, and he needs allies. If you and Prince Kale... I said no. I stood up, pacing the room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I'm not going to marry for political convenience. I won't. I'd rather run away and join the... I stopped, realizing I'd been about to say something ridiculous like join the circus. Cordelia watched me with a mix of sympathy and concern. What happened to you, Aurora? You used to be so pragmatic. You understood the weight of duty, the burden of the crown. Now she shook her head. You're like a different person. I forced myself to stop pacing. Maybe I am. Maybe I realized that I've been sacrificing myself for other people's expectations my whole life. And I'm tired of it. Cordelia was quiet for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. I understand. More than you know. She walked over and took my hands in hers. But Aurora, you can't just hide forever. There are things you need to face. Things we both need to face. The kingdom is changing, and we have to adapt. What do you mean? I asked, searching her face. She hesitated. There are things I haven't told you. Things about Uncle Marcus, about the threat from the north, about... She broke off, shaking her head. This isn't the time. We need to prepare for the dinner. We'll talk more later. I wanted to press her, to demand answers, but I could see that she'd already retreated behind her mask. So I nodded and allowed her to guide me into the adjoining room, where a team of maids was waiting to help me dress for the evening. Chapter 3. The Prince Who Wasn't in the Story. The gown Cordelia had chosen was a deep emerald green, the color of pine forests and hidden glades. It was cut low at the neckline, with sleeves that fell off my shoulders and a skirt that pooled around me like liquid silk. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Perfect, Cordelia breathed, adjusting a curl that had fallen across my brow. You look absolutely stunning. I feel like I'm wearing a costume, I muttered, but I couldn't deny the effect. I looked like a princess, like the princess I'd always dreamed of being. The dining hall was magnificent, as it always was. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow sparkles across the walls, and the long mahogany table was laden with silver dishes and golden goblets. The guests were already assembled when we arrived, King Aldrich at the head of the table, Queen Eleanor at his side, and across from them, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Lord Theron, the Eldorian ambassador, and beside him his son. I stopped in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. Prince Cale was not what I'd expected. He was younger than I'd imagined, perhaps 25, with dark hair that fell across his brow and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was handsome in a way that made my heart stutter, with a strong jaw and a smile that seemed to promise secrets. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was the way he looked at me, with recognition, like he knew me, like he'd been waiting for me. Aurora. His voice was warm, almost intimate, as he rose from his seat. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I was supposed to curtsy. I was supposed to say something charming and diplomatic. Instead, I stood there like a statue, my mind reeling. Because Prince Cale wasn't in my novel. I'd never written him. He was completely, utterly new. Your Highness, I managed, dropping into a curtsy that felt clumsy and awkward. The pleasure is mine. His lips curved into a smile, and I felt my cheeks flush. What was happening to me? I'd never reacted this way to anyone in my other life. I'd been too busy, too tired, too consumed by my own imagination to entertain real connections. But this man, this character that I'd never created, was looking at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. I've heard so much about you, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. Your father speaks of you often. He says you're the heart of the kingdom. I glanced at my father, who was watching the exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. My father is generous in his praise. Not generous enough, Cale said, and there was something in his voice that made my heart race. You're more beautiful than any portrait could capture. I should have said something clever. I should have deflected the compliment with a witty remark and moved on. But all I could do was stare at him, caught in the intensity of his gaze. Prince Cale, who wasn't in my story, who had appeared out of nowhere, like a plot twist I hadn't anticipated. What did this mean? Had I changed the story just by being here? Or was this always meant to happen, a future I hadn't written yet? The dinner was a blur of polite conversation and delicate foods. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. On Cale. On the mystery of his presence. On the strange, electric feeling that sparked between us whenever our eyes met. You're quiet tonight, Cordelia murmured, leaning close as the servants cleared the main course. Are you all right? I nodded, forcing a smile. Just tired. It's been a long week. She gave me a knowing look but didn't press. Instead, she turned her attention to the ambassador, engaging him in conversation about trade routes and tariffs. Cale leaned toward me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Would you care to take a walk in the gardens? The night is lovely, and I find myself in need of fresh air. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse, retired to my chambers, and spent the night trying to figure out what was happening to me. But something in his eyes made me pause. Something that looked like longing, like need, like a reflection of the loneliness I felt. I would like that, I heard myself say. The gardens were beautiful in the moonlight. Silver light filtered through the leaves, casting patterns on the gravel paths. The air was cool and sweet, heavy with the scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine. Cale offered me his arm, and I took it, feeling the warmth of him through the silk of his sleeve. We walked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under our feet and the distant chirp of crickets. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. I looked up at him. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more." He paused, searching for the right word. "Guarded." The princess I'd heard about was always so composed, so perfectly controlled. "But you seem different, like there's something beneath the surface that you're hiding." I stopped walking, pulling away from him. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "I've been watching you all evening. You smile at the right moments, say the right things. But your eyes, they're somewhere else. Like you're not really here." I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He was right. I wasn't here. Not really. I was still trying to make sense of this world, still trying to understand how I'd gotten here and what I was supposed to do. "I don't know how to explain it," I said finally. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like I'm playing a role that doesn't quite fit." Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took my hand. "I understand that feeling better than you know." I looked up at him, surprise flickering through me. "You do?" He nodded. "In Eldoria, I'm always the prince.
The heir.
The one everyone expects to be perfect. But inside, I'm just me. A man with fears and doubts and dreams that have nothing to do with crowns and kingdoms." I stared at him, something shifting in my chest. This man, this character I'd never written, was speaking my own thoughts back to me. How was that possible? "Sometimes," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them, "I feel like I'm going to wake up and find that none of this is real. That I'm still living in my—" I stopped, catching myself before I could say something unforgivable. "You're what?" Cale prompted gently. I shook my head, pulling my hand away. "Nothing."
I'm sorry.
"I don't know what I'm saying. I must be more tired than I realized." Cale didn't push. Instead, he simply nodded and offered me his arm again. "Shall I take you back to the castle? The night is getting cold, and you look like you could use some rest." I took his arm, grateful for his discretion. As we walked back through the gardens, I couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. Who was this man who seemed to see through every wall I'd built? And why did I feel like I could trust him with secrets I'd never told anyone? Chapter 4. The Forgotten Prophecy. The morning after the dinner, I found myself in the castle library, surrounded by dusty tomes and faded scrolls. I'd woken up with a strange feeling in my chest, an urgency that I couldn't explain. Like something was calling me, pulling me toward answers I didn't know I needed. The librarian, an old man with spectacles and a kind smile, had shown me to the section on Eldorian history. "The prince has quite a reputation," he said, his eyes twinkling. "They say he's brilliant and a little rebellious. He's been known to sneak out of the palace to explore the streets of the capital." I smiled, tucking that information away. "What else do they say about him?" "Nothing that would befit a princess's ears," the librarian said with a wink. "But I can tell you this, he's not one to be fooled by appearances. He sees people for who they really are. That's a rare gift in a royal." I nodded, thinking about the way Cale had looked at me in the garden. He had seen me, really seen me, beneath all the pretense and politeness. And he hadn't run away. The hours passed in a blur of research and revelations. I combed through the scrolls, looking for any mention of Prince Cale and his family. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a prophecy, an old one, buried in the depths of the Eldorian archives. It spoke of a union between the two kingdoms, a marriage that would bring peace and prosperity to both lands. But it also spoke of something darker, a threat that would rise from the north, an enemy that would stop at nothing to destroy everything we'd built. And in the center of that prophecy, the name of the princess who would bring it all together. Princess Aurora of Valdris, I read aloud, my voice trembling. The one who will unite the kingdoms, or destroy them all. I dropped the scroll, my hands shaking. This was impossible. I'd never written any of this. The prophecy, the threat from the north, the prince who saw through my walls. None of it was in my novel. What was happening to me? Had I somehow changed the story just by being here? Or was this always meant to happen? A future I hadn't anticipated? I gathered the scrolls and hurried back to my chambers. I needed to think, to make sense of everything. But the more I tried to understand, the more confused I became. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Princess Aurora? The voice came from the doorway, and I looked up to see a servant standing there, his expression worried. There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. I frowned. Who is it? Prince Kale, Your Highness. He says he must speak with you immediately. My heart raced. What was he doing here? It was too soon for another visit, too soon for... Show him in, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Kale strode into the room, his expression grave. He was wearing simple traveling clothes, and there was a dusting of road dirt on his boots. He'd ridden hard to get here, I realized. Aurora, he said, taking my hands in his. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you last night. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. What is it? He took a deep breath. The prophecy. You know about it, don't you? I nodded slowly. I just read about it this morning. It spoke of a union between the kingdoms and a threat from the north. And I hesitated. It mentioned my name. Kale squeezed my hands. There's more. There's a part of the prophecy that's been kept hidden. A part that explains why you're here. Why you? He broke off, searching my face. Aurora, I know you're not from here. I know you're not the princess you seem to be. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? That's ridiculous. Of course I'm Princess Aurora. He shook his head. You're not. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you move, in the way you look at everything like you're seeing it for the first time. You're someone else. Someone who's been brought here for a purpose. I pulled away from him, my heart racing. I don't know what you're talking about, Aurora. He stepped closer, his eyes intense.
Please.
I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. There are forces at work that you don't understand. Forces that brought you here for a reason. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew the truth. How is that possible? I don't understand, I whispered. I don't understand any of this. Kale reached out and took my hands again, his touch gentle and reassuring. Let me explain.
Please.
It might be difficult to believe, but it's the truth. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He led me to the lounge and sat beside me, his presence grounding me in ways I couldn't explain. The prophecy you read about, he began, was written centuries ago, before either of our kingdoms was founded. It speaks of a threat that would rise from the north, a darkness that would consume everything in its path. And it speaks of a savior, someone who would be brought here from another world to stop it. My breath caught in my throat. Another world? He nodded. The prophecy says that the savior would come from somewhere beyond this realm. A place where magic is only a dream and the only escape is through imagination. And that savior would be a princess, someone who had dreamed of a life like this, who had longed for a world of romance and adventure. I stared at him, my mind spinning. You're saying I was brought here intentionally? That I'm supposed to save your world? I'm saying there are forces at work that we don't understand, Kale said gently. But yes, I believe you were brought here for a reason. To fulfill the prophecy. To stop the darkness that's coming. I shook my head, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I can't do that. I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not a hero. I'm not a savior. You're not ordinary, Kale said, his voice firm. You're the one the prophecy chose. And I believe in you, Aurora. I believe you can do this. I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, I saw something there that made my heart ache.
Belief. Trust.
And something more, something that looked like love. How do I know I can trust you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kale reached into his coat and pulled out a small, ancient-looking medallion. This is the seal of Eldoria, he said, pressing it into my palm. It's one of the most powerful artifacts in our kingdom. It's been in my family for generations, passed down from the first king of Eldoria to his heirs. I'm giving it to you as a sign of my trust. My oath that I will never lie to you, never betray you, never abandon you. I stared at the medallion, its surface warm against my skin. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can and you will, Kale said firmly, because you're going to need it. The darkness is coming, Aurora. And I need you to be ready. Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of training and preparation. Kale visited as often as he could, bringing scrolls and ancient texts that spoke of the northern threat. Cordelia joined our efforts, her sharp mind and fierce spirit an invaluable asset. But the more we learned, the darker the picture became. The enemy is called the Shadow King, Kale explained one evening, his voice grim. He rules a vast empire to the north, and he's been slowly expanding his territory for years. He's amassed an army of creatures that are not quite human, twisted versions of men and beasts corrupted by dark magic. I shivered, remembering the monsters I'd written in my novel. They had been purely fictional, invented for the sake of drama. But in this world, they were real, and they were coming for us. How do we stop him? I asked. Kale spread a map across the table. The Shadow King draws his power from the veil, a magical barrier that separates our world from the realm of shadows. If we can reinforce the veil, we can cut off his power source. But it will take a great sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? I asked, dreading the answer. Kale hesitated. The prophecy says that the Savior must give up something precious, something that ties them to their old life. I felt the blood drain from my face. You're saying I have to give up my memories of my other life? The only thing that makes me who I am? I'm saying the prophecy is clear, Kale said gently. The Savior must sacrifice their connection to the world they came from in order to save this one. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream and cry and demand a different way. But deep down, I knew it was true. I'd felt something shifting inside me ever since I'd arrived here, a growing attachment to this world, to the people in it. The memories of my other life were already fading, slipping away like water through my fingers. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was the point. I need time to think, I said finally. This isn't something I can decide overnight. Kale nodded, his expression filled with understanding. Take all the time you need. But Aurora, the Shadow King's forces are already on the move. We may not have much time. The days passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. I trained with the castle guards, learning to defend myself with a sword. I studied the ancient texts, memorizing the rituals that would reinforce the veil. And I spent long hours with Cordelia, savoring every moment we had together. But the shadow of